This is the common denominator, and I'm Ilana Rachel Daniel.
Today is Wednesday, July 17th, 2024. One of the many controversies that complicates the state of Israel is one that arose at the time of its modern state inception, and that is the issue of recruiting the Ultra-Orthodox population into the Israeli military. It has long been a sore and complicated subject, but since October 7th, it's become so fervent and divisive, it's now an unavoidable problem that must be resolved. The argument may seem altogether obvious. There's a horrific war on, and it's lasting more than any has before it. Our brave men and women are exhausted and away from home far too long. As danger looms and increases on our northern front and beyond, there's no end in sight, and more hands on deck are needed. Stat. But as usual, there are far more complexities than media sound bites permit. And even if one's ultimate position does not change, it's important to view with a broad lens the complexities considered by this people. Israel has a standing army of around 170,000 soldiers and another 465,000 reservists. After October 7th, the government agreed to call upon some 330,000 of its reservists, and to date, at least two-thirds of that number have actually been called upon to join in the war efforts. Israel has a compulsory military service, which means that all citizens are conscripted at the age of 18. Men are obligated to at least 32 months of service, and women 24 months. In addition, many are frequently required to continue as reservists, which may entail several weeks of army service or training each year. It's now been 9 long months of atrocious war with Hamas, embedded in hundreds of kilometers of cross-country tunnels and residential homes in Gaza. Hezbollah launches daily, endless barrages, just last night over 100 of missiles and drones from Lebanon. Every citizen countrywide faces the sporadic, lone, and organized lethal violence from Islamists living in Yehud and Shomron, also known as the West Bank, and who could forget the occasional missiles or drones flying in from Yemen, Syria, and Iraq. The Israeli military is not built for long wars, but for quick and sure get in and get out operations, and it, and we all, are fraying at the edges. In March, the IDF announced a shortage of 7,000 soldiers, and in early July, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant added that the IDF needed 10,000 soldiers immediately. One way the Army is increasing the manpower shortage is to increase the required obligatory length of service. As of last Sunday, July 4th, the Cabinet approved a bill to increase service time for men from 32 to 36 months. This bill includes all male soldiers currently serving in the IDF and those incoming for the next 5 years. There are additional plans to increase the retirement age for reserve duty from soldiers from age 40 to 45, for officers from age 45 to 50, and for those in special roles from 49 to 52 years of age. Opposition leader Benny Gantz, who's currently ahead in polls to become the next prime minister, has said he will support this bill if there will be a significant increase in monetary compensation for combat and combat support soldiers who must serve 36 months. He also stipulated that the IDF must send out recruitment orders for ultra-Orthodox and Arab citizens to participate in IDF and other forms of national service. In light of the unprecedented threats to Israel's existence, the call for the ultra-Orthodox population of the country, also known as the Haredim, to enlist have increased to deafening pitch. The issue has come at last to a head. But the story of this issue starts at the birth of this modern state of Israel and the War of Independence, when first Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion granted 400 yeshiva students exemption from the army. The Orthodox Jewish world was utterly decimated by the Holocaust, and 400 students was a modest number at a time when there were genuine concerns that yeshivas, Jewish religious learning institutions, would be shut due to lack of students. It's important to note here, in opposition to the widely believed narrative that the modern state of Israel was established as a result of the Holocaust, in fact, the very opposite is true. Plans and efforts to create a modern state were well in production for many years prior. It was the inverse. The Holocaust threatened the establishment of the state, for early Yeshuv Jews feared that there was virtually no one left to come and build it. The number of religious exemptions quickly grew from the hundreds into the thousands. In meetings with religious leaders, Ben-Gurion maintained that only yeshiva students who were actually studying in yeshivas could stay out of the army, for being religious itself was not a reason to avoid the draft. On October 20th, 1952, Ben-Gurion met with the famed rabbi, the Chazon Ish, at his humble apartment in Bnei Brak. Rabbi Avraham Yeshaya Kurelitz was born in Belarus in 1878. He immigrated to Israel in 1933. Rabbi Kurelitz had released his earlier books anonymously under the name Chazon Ish, Vision of Man, and later became known by that same name. Although the Chazon Ish was not part of any religious political movements, he had tremendous influence over the Haredi communities in Israel. And when asked if he would be willing to meet with Ben-Gurion, the Chazon Ish replied, "The door is always open." The only person to witness the encounter was Yitzhak Navon. Navon, at the time, was Ben-Gurion's personal secretary. He went on to become the 5th president of the State of Israel between 1978 and 1983. Not only was he the first Israeli president born in Jerusalem, his family had been in Israel for centuries. His father's family had emigrated from Turkey to Israel in 1640, and his mother came from Morocco, and her family were descendants of the Kabbalist Rabbi Chaim ibn Attar, who emigrated to Israel and settled in Jerusalem in 1742. Navon took notes of the meeting, and he painted an extraordinary picture of what took place. Ben-Gurion was vying to gain support for a bill to enlist religious girls who were exempt from the army into an alternative national service. The Haredi rabbis were strongly opposed. Ben-Gurion understood he needed the support of the religious leaders in order to influence the religious political parties. And one of those parties was Poalei Agudas Israel, who were known to frequently consult with the Chazon Ish on matters of import. Ben-Gurion asked him, saying, "How will we, religious and non-religious Jews, live without exploding from within? We have different views. How do we live together?" The Chazon Ish's reply has since become a famous and oft-referred-to Talmudic parable, and it goes as follows. If two camels meet on a path and one camel is bearing a load and the other is not bearing a load, the one without a load must give way to the camel bearing a load. We religious Jews are likened to the camel bearing a load. We have a burden of many mitzvot. The Chazon Ish made it clear that the wagon of the non-religious Zionists was empty. But Ben-Gurion pressed him, saying the following, I quote, "And the mitzvah of settling the land is not a mitzvah? And is it not a burden? And the mitzvah of protecting life is not a mitzvah? And what are the young men doing that you are so opposed to? They are sitting on the borders and guarding you. Isn't that a mitzvah?" However, the Chazon Ish stood firm in his belief that the state of Israel is sustained through the learning of Torah, whereas Ben-Gurion maintained that without the army defending Israel, the country would be destroyed. It is this impossible to solve argument that endures to this very day and time. For perhaps the truth of the matter is that they are both correct. Ben-Gurion said that his visit to the Chazon Ish was, quote, "an unforgettable experience." But far more than that, after the meeting, Ben-Gurion agreed to continue the military exemption that had been set up in 1948, giving the concept his political support. And that established many of the religious laws that define Israel today, including those that grant the rabbinical courts the sole authority in marriage and divorce, establish Shabbat, the Sabbath, and holy days as official days of rest, the laws of religious education, and the prohibition of public transport operating on Shabbat. Some have asked, why did Ben-Gurion back down on this issue and agree to continued military exemption? It could be that he was greatly troubled by the prospect of internal dispute within Israel, and considered this a danger greater to Israel than the Arab armies who have not for a moment ceased to threaten us with destruction. If that was his reasoning, and even if it was not, I would add here that looking in hindsight, just as far back as one can, as well as from our present perspective, that despite our myriad of formidable threats, nothing destroys our people as thoroughly, viscerally, and surely as do our internal divides. One will recall that prior to October 7th, Israel was split as the country had never been before. And whether that was seen by our enemies as a time to strike in our distraction, or the disunity of our people had weakened us from within, inviting the bullies of the region, a vast number of Israelis would agree that the division between us was the critical component to our having reached the crisis point that we have today. The Jews' own historical lesson has always been that No matter the multiple and myriad of terrifying enemies that rise up against us, it is when we fight one another above all, we may know that catastrophe is all but sure to come. God forbid. 3 weeks ago, on June 25th, 2024, the status quo was shaken from the roots. The Supreme Court unanimously ruled that since the last draft exemption law expired 1 year prior in June 2023, there's no legal mechanism to continue to exempt Haredim from army service. The court went on to say that the state was carrying out, quote, invalid selective enforcement, which represents a severe violation of the rule of law. It said the government must immediately start drafting ultra-Orthodox men into the military. The court also made permanent the interim ruling that it had made on March 27th, that the government can no longer fund religious seminaries and yeshivas whose young students decline to enlist. Notably, that high court panel included several religious and conservative judges. This week, the court ordered the government to act immediately, but didn't specify a time frame in which they must. In response, the organization, the Movement for Quality Government, has filed a petition that the IDF immediately draft all 63,000 ultra-Orthodox men who are eligible. The filing claims that the IDF has been conducting secret negotiations with rabbinical leaders to come to an agreement over selective conscription of Haredi men, who, for instance, are already working, married with children, or who have smartphones. The government, for its part, has repeatedly extended the Haredi exemption, but has been unable to make it permanent through legislation. The ultra-Orthodox community comprises around 13% of the population in Israel, and they make up around 25% of enlistment-aged men, yet total around 3% of army recruits. We heard a Rabbi Breitowitz from Yeshivat Or Sameach address this dilemma from the perspective of halacha, Jewish law. I wish to summarize it here, so bear with the line of thinking. You may find it's understood differently than how you imagined. According to the Ramban, Nachmanides, it's a mitzvah, a commandment straight from the Torah itself, to settle the biblical land of Israel. Anti-Semites, please take note, the commandment applies to the land of Israel and Israel alone. Rome, Russia, Mecca, Medina, Paris, and DC, they're all yours. It's our mitzvah, our directive from God, to make the land of Israel habitable and to be sovereign nation within it. There are only 3 reasons the Torah permits the Jews to go to war, and one is to protect the Jewish people from an enemy trying to destroy them. I may be no rabbi, but I will be so bold as to conclude that the wars Israel has fought for survival since 1948 have been defensive wars to save us from imminent and intended destruction. That, we have made clear, is the genocidal aim of each and every terrorist group given money and arms for 76 plus years. A war to evade destruction of our people can be characterized and categorized as a milchemet mitzvah, a war of commandment, in which case it would mean there are no exemptions from participation. However, according to the Rambam, Maimonides, the tribe of Levi was exempt even from a milchemet mitzvah, a war of commandment, because their job was to learn Torah full-time and to teach it to the people of Israel. Now that is a lofty level of study indeed. Can all ultra-Orthodox include themselves in this distinction? Now, if we say there is no exemption in a war of commandment, then we would call upon this section of society to participate should there arise an emergency shortage of manpower. Until this moment in time, the Haredim have been able to say, and honestly so, you don't need us. Our needs and way of life would anyway impose a huge inconvenience to the army. And if you insist on our enlisting, it's evidently and largely to assimilate us. However, and as we've noted, there is a shortage of manpower today. And there is too, with it, the realization among the Haredim that this argument no longer applies. And they must reevaluate their position and make compromises lest they face a backlash that will be utterly irrevocable. Ultra-Orthodox Judaism may be to your taste or not, but please try to understand the distinctions. The IDF is certainly a dangerous environment physically, and no one is entitled to a greater concern over their well-being than any other. But in the Haredi perspective, the danger is not only physical, but spiritual. And there are indeed many incidents where a person has lost his religious motivation following army service. Compare it somewhat to those in the US combating the appalling and nauseating sexualization of children in the education system. Parents who are able are opting out of the public school system. They're homeschooling or finding alternative routes to educate their kids because they understand the irreversible nature of certain influences over a person and what it does to their mind and soul and path in life. It is the task of each mother and father to do what they can to protect their child and the morals and path in which they're raised. Spiritual harm in our vastly changing world has become the task of each and every parent. It's only a matter of the nature of one's local threats. For the ultra-Orthodox, Torah study is considered a paramount religious duty, and many view military service as incompatible with their religious lifestyle, which includes strict adherence to Jewish law, modesty codes, and segregation of the sexes. Military service is felt as a threat to their way of life. But why? Why is Torah study so important to the Jews? How could it possibly be seen to take precedence over saving our flesh and blood lives from genocidal terrorists? Jewish sages teach that Torah study is equal to all of the other commandments combined, and so too are its rewards in this world and the spiritual one. You can dedicate a lifetime to Torah study and still have many more lifetimes worth to learn, for it is a world without end. The Torah has been the life's blood and unifying force that held the Jews together as we have been spread across the world enduring endless, and still, persecutions for 2,000 years. Maim Chaim, the Torah is called, living waters. The Torah is compared to water, and like vital, essential water, it's kept us alive and a cohesive nation throughout all we've experienced. There are inside many Jews an abiding thirst to learn as tangible as a glass of water under our Middle Eastern sun. After 3,500 years, Torah is learnt in Israel on an unprecedented scale. And it's a testament to the roots of the Jewish people and a testament to God's existence. Did Ben-Gurion touch upon this when granting a waiver to those 400 yeshiva students 76 years ago? If the subtleties haven't quite hit home yet, I'll offer this example. I read it via David Bashevkin and other accounts on X, albeit in a slightly different context. Staunchly secular David Ben-Gurion met also once with the Klausenberger Rebbe. The Klausenberger Rebbe survived the Holocaust, though his wife and children were murdered. He was at one time during the war gravely wounded and bleeding out, but he couldn't approach the medical clinic, having witnessed their extraordinary cruelty. He tied his wound together with what he found outside and prayed to God that if he survived, he would establish a medical center with compassion. And that he indeed did. Laniado Hospital is located today in Netanya. Ben-Gurion asked the Klausenberger Rebbe what's the minimum he'd want to see religiously in Israel, and what's the most he'd want to see. The minimum, the Rebbe said, is that I should be able to wear a strimal openly. The most is that you should wear one too. The point is this: the Nazis persecuted the religious garb of the Orthodox, their beards, their talit, and also their strimals, the fur hat that denotes certain religious sects within Judaism. The Rebbe wanted the assurance they would not face such persecution in a Jewish state. The IDF has 4 fundamental values, and I maintain them to be evident and true. True despite the IDF's still unanswered and untenable failures, or otherwise, on October 7th. The leadership of the institutional face of the IDF has neither been called by name nor held to account for the gross failures during Hamas's invasion. Until that time, when transparency is gained and justice is served, those unanswered failures will continue to be the weak link in the chain of our Jewish army's fortitude and our resilience. It exists now as an exposed and bleeding wound that cannot heal and threatens to infect the body as a whole. The people that compose our army, however, the neighbors, servicemen, and professionals we live with day in and day out, they embody, now more than they have before in our lifetimes, the values the IDF states below and as follows. 1. The purpose of the IDF is to protect Israel and its independence and ensure the security of its residents. 2. Patriotism and commitment and devotion to the state of Israel and its people are at the very core of service in the IDF. 3. The IDF and our soldiers are obligated to protect human dignity. Every individual is of inherent value regardless of their ethnicity, religion, nationality, gender, or status. And 4. The IDF is the people's army. The state of Israel's military, subject to the law and government of the state of Israel. IDF soldiers will operate with their mission, the IDF's values, and the security of Israel is their priority. They will operate with integrity, practicality, and presentably. The army is also viewed as a vital melting pot for Israeli society. For many Israelis, it plays a significant role in forming the bonds of friendship that underlie the nation. These friendships formed in the military may continue throughout people's lives and form a bond between the state and its citizens, which is further cemented by Israel's constant security needs. The role one takes in his and her army service may likewise influence their career. Thus, it becomes our collective effort and responsibility to keep this country alive. There is a lot of promotional advertising in this, of that there is no doubt. But sometimes there's truth in advertising. And what we fight for and how we do so is an entirely accurate representation of the efforts of a Jewish people's army that is an essential part to our maintaining sovereignty over this land. The army has established special units where Orthodox Jews can maintain their religious practice. For instance, within the Gavati Brigade is the Rotem Battalion, and it's considered an ultra-Orthodox male combat unit. Last month, the IDF announced its plans to establish a combat unit exclusively for religious women. This plan was developed with the support of the military rabbinate to meet the needs of religious female soldiers. The decision was made in order to support some 3,500 religious women enlisting yearly, where around 10% of them choose combat roles. This new unit will be part of the Combat Intelligence Collection Corps and will be staffed entirely by women. They'll have a female halachic advisor and will include Torah study. This coming Sunday, July 21st, 2024, the IDF, operating in accordance with the law and government decisions, will begin issuing initial summons orders for candidates from the ultra-Orthodox community. This marks the start of the first call-up and the assessment and evaluation for the upcoming recruitment cycle, which began in July. Chairman of the Knesset Jewish Committee, M.K. Edelstein, ordered an urgent meeting of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee in order to receive clarifications and explanations from the IDF regarding the announcement that conscription orders are expected to be sent to thousands of ultra-Orthodox. As of now, there's no indication of an orderly mechanism or even clear criteria as to who is expected to receive the draft orders, and this move is expected to provoke absolute chaos among the ultra-Orthodox. Already this week, extremists have acted out on the streets of Bnei Brak. It's also not clear what the legal status of the order is, since there's no legal backing regarding the selection that the IDF is expected to make when sending the orders. As of this moment, it's not even clear if this is an arbitrary selection of recruits or if there are any criteria behind the selection for recruitment. Welcome to the Israeli way. This is an ongoing and highly volatile situation, and one we'll continue to report on as it unfolds and pray for the miracle of sanity to prevail. I cannot help but feel with a little ingenuity, that which we most certainly possess, a lot can be made of this dilemma. It's true that compromise might bring us down from the furthest ends of two sides, but it might also make us cohesive in a way that necessitates our surviving the coming years ahead. The point here, like so many we have brought before you, is that the difficulties and challenges presented to the myriad of people in Israel is not now and never has been simple. For a tiny people, as the joke goes, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, are a vast range of thought, perspective, experience, and presentation in the world. The brave warriors who put their bodies between our families and those that come again and again in droves to harm us are a kind of bravery and giving of self that I cannot view as other than an elevated level that the components of our army exemplifies like no other. To my thinking, these soldiers embody the Torah in a living, breathing honor and sanctification of life. You may need to visit Israel to see just how close in vicinity are those who threaten us with destruction to understand why this is uniquely true. It is simultaneously true that the Torah, our awesome living guide throughout thousands of years of untold trials, persecution, challenges, and scattered diaspora is the dynamic guidance from above and within that's kept us a cohesive people throughout our untold adversities, unlike any other nation has experienced over such time and scale. I heard former PM Naftali Bennett say this recently, and it rings clear and true. If a Jew could time travel back to these same cities we live in today, Jerusalem, Tiberias, Tzfat, Hebron, thousands of years ago, he would, with some minor adjustments, meet with a language he more or less understands, and a tradition and religious practice he recognizes as his own. It is with extraordinary awe and gratitude we note the continuity of the ancient Jewish people. It's said that more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, the Shabbat has kept the Jews. It could also be said that the continued existence of the Jews, despite all we have endured, is proof itself of the existence of God. Without the structure of our Torah, we are not Jews. Without our land, we are not sovereign and subject to every horror that can and cannot be named. But without unity, we are not a nation. We need to be a nation of David Amelechs, of King David's, beloved unto God and fierce warrior to his enemies. May we learn to live, to thrive, and to flourish in the dualities we cannot outrun. I'm Ilana Rachel Daniel, and this is The Common Denominator.